Munitions for war. This is military training at Trentham. Men and munitions. The regular army has 800 pounds worth of equipment for every man on strength. The Home Guard, also training at Trentham, need equipment and munitions too. Some of this material has to be drawn from overseas. Much of it we are making ourselves, much more than we made in the last war. In the last war, only uniforms, boots, saddlery, light personal equipment and small arms ammunition were made in New Zealand. Since those days, heavy industry has developed. Today, our workshops make wheels, make buffers, and despite the lack of home-produced iron and steel, they make complete locomotives. Light engineering, too, has developed to meet the needs of a rising standard of living, making aluminum pistons, assembling imported cars, building radio sets and sound amplifiers. A modern zinc alloy is ready to be injected into a die. The metal is poured into the die casting machine, forced into the die. And out come metal parts which go to make washing machines. The manufacture of rifle ammunition is a New Zealand industry half a century old and still growing. Brass is picked up by this machine, and a dozen others shape it into cartridge cases. The bullets are examined. The cases filled with cordite and necked onto the bullets. The rounds are checked with gauges, and then some of them are tested with other machines. Ammunition pours out. This is just half a day's output, and the work goes on. In the washing machine factory, a new die is fitted into the casting machine. The factory is turning over to a wartime line of production. The alloy is poured, injected into the mold, and out comes not washing machine parts, but a casting to make 6 cores for hand grenades. The casting is broken up, the cores go on, and the scrap goes back to be melted down again. All munition parts must conform to exact standards, so after machining, they are tested for accuracy and size by means of gauges. A shortage of gauges formed the first bottleneck in the country's drive to produce munitions. The gauges had to be drawn by draftsmen, and made by the few skilled gauge makers in the country. Here is a gauge maker using a gauge to test the accuracy of his own work. No longer does lack of gauges hold up production. The gauges are ready, and parts for munitions go through their tests. These grenade cores must fit into cases machined and gauged to the same standards in other factories. After gauges, shortage of machines might have been a check on production, but more machines have been imported. Other machines and tools are being made in New Zealand. Here, for example, is a special air conditioning plant for a room where explosives are handled. We have the machines and the skilled workers to run them. We have the raw materials too, but the saving of all scrap is important. Workshops and factories in both islands change over to double shifts to increase their output. Grenade cases come from the paint shop. They are screwed down on their cores. They are taken away to be filled. Wooden boxes are made, and the grenades are packed into them, a dozen at a time, together with detonators. Gas rings are included, which convert them into rifle grenades. In Dunedin, trench mortars are being turned and assembled. At Rongotai, light aeroplanes are being built for Air Force training. In Auckland, the first of 12 minesweepers takes the water. In the railway's pattern shop, a curious-looking part is being shaped. From this part, a mold is made in special sand. The metal is poured into the mold. The mold is broken open and the casing trimmed and machined. The finished part has springs and wheels made in other shops fitted to it. The whole part is pushed onto an axle. A Caterpillar track goes over it. And off they roll. New Zealand-built Wren gun carriers. At Trentham, Divisional Cavalry train in these Bren gun carriers from the railway workshops.
Mount, more time, direction in front, White House, 1200, lane.
Infantry take New Zealand-made trench mortars into action, using bombs which are also products of New Zealand industry. And the Home Guard is training with hand grenades made in New Zealand. These units swing into action just as New Zealand industry has gone into action to provide equipment and uniforms as well as weapons for our fighting men. This is our striking power, men and munitions.